Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to our talk tonight, How to Be Incredibly Productive, even when you have anxiety. Well done for turning up. With these events, we always get loads of people saying they're interested, loads of people buying tickets, and then loads of people not coming. And I know a lot of the times when I go to a race and I see everyone else is faster than me and I start beating myself up, and then I remember that I'm almost certainly faster than all of the people who didn't turn up. So I'd really encourage you to spend the next hour or two really engaging with tonight. I know a lot of the time when I go to events, I spend the whole time with my mind thinking about how I'm going to get home, what I'm going to have for dinner tomorrow, what jobs I need to get done for the weekend. So I'd really encourage you all to practice a bit of mindfulness here and really invest in some self-care and spend the next hour or two just focused on what we're talking about here. We're going to cover a lot of stuff, so if you want to make some notes, please do. If you haven't brought anything to make notes on, you could use the Notes app on your phone. I'm just saying that now because I don't want you to feel like you're being rude by pulling your phone out and typing away. I hereby give you permission to do that, and I won't think you're just texting your friends instead of listening to me. Or if you do want to do that, I won't know. So either way, it will work out fine. I'll give everyone a minute to get their phones out. It is a bit warm. So it might open.
No, there's another setting outside. Double.
Yeah, is it like an airlock? So this is me. I'm sure you can see the resemblance. I'm a psychologist at the Leeds Anxiety Clinic, which is an awesome job. Most clinics don't really have psychologists, they just have the practitioners, the counsellors, and so it's great that I get to take a bit of a step back from that and do some more of the academic stuff and look at how we're providing the treatments, what we're doing, what services we're offering. I won't talk too much about that because I'm not here to plug the clinic, I'm here to talk about productivity. But when we came to brainstorming what we should talk about, because we do these events quite regularly, there was loads of fun, interesting academic things we could have talked about, but the question that gets asked most for me is productivity. I run the Leeds Anxiety Clinic, I run a software company as well, I run a mental health charity, I run another charity on top of that. I've got a daughter who's 2, and in between all of that, I trained and raced 9 triathlons last year, which is super fun, and I would encourage you all to give it a go. But the question is, how do you fit more stuff into your life? Because there's a load of stuff going on there, and I'm sure that you have loads of stuff going on as well. It could be you've got nothing going on, and you think, how do I just get one thing done? But my guess is that most of you have quite a lot going on, and you're struggling to balance it, and you've got other stuff that you want to cram in there, and you're wondering, how do I do all that? And how do I do all that without stressing, without beating myself up, without constantly feeling that I've got no time, and that leading to me feeling drained? And the good news is that there's technology available to help us do this. And I don't mean technology in terms of our iPhone, I mean psychological techniques, things that have been developed by academic research that we can apply to our lives and will allow us to make us more productive. But more importantly, I think, is to do that stuff without that constant feeling that we're just not doing enough and the really draining kind of personal self-attack on ourselves that we can often do when we feel like we're not getting enough done. And my guess is that at the moment, your life looks something like this. This is certainly what my life looked like before I learned a lot of this stuff. I was definitely being productive some of the time, but I was spending a lot of time being stressed about not being productive enough. I was spending a lot of time avoiding and procrastinating over the things I was doing, and I certainly wasn't spending any time doing any self-care, doing any relaxation, and just being nice to myself. And it's not a great place to be in because it just leaves you even more drained when you're doing this self-attack. So what I want to encourage you to go to is that we're not going to go to a place where we're just 100% productive and the pie chart just goes all blue. And just to set your expectations, I'm not BuzzFeed. I don't have one weird trick that will make you 4 times more productive. But I think we can get somewhere here where we're being productive a lot of the time. There's still a bit of stress and avoidance and procrastination, because that's just, as anxiety sufferers, we're going to run into that. But we're 3 times more productive here, even with some self-care and even with some relaxation, than we are here. So it's not going to magically make any of the problems go away, but learning to be less productive than you want to be will make you more productive overall. If you aim for 100% productivity, that's going to lead to perfectionism, that's going to lead to you beating yourself up. If we aim for something like 60% productive, something more realistic, then we're going to be a lot happier and we're going to get way more done than we are when we're constantly stressing about it. So we're going to do 4 things tonight. We're going to do a bit on understanding anxiety and why anxiety is a barrier to productivity. We're then going to look at how we can use psychology to overcome avoidance and procrastination. We're going to look at focusing in on what's important. So if you've ever felt like you're doing something and it's busy work and you know you've got something more important to be doing, but you can't get out of this thing, then that section will cover it. And then finally, we'll look at scheduling and relaxation, which, as we get to, I'll explain, will make us more productive and will make us happier. So we'll start by talking a bit about anxiety. You might be familiar with the topic already, but anxiety is a completely normal process. All human beings experience stress and anxiety. When a threat comes up, when a tiger jumps out at us, we experience anxiety, and that's a healthy, normal thing to happen. If that wasn't happening, we wouldn't have done very well historically. But for some of us, our stress response triggers easier than others. Some of you may identify with that, the idea that little things that just don't seem to worry other people, seem to worry some of us more, and our stress response is more easily triggered. And that's when we start getting symptoms like sweating, like our heart racing faster, like our breath increasing, like us feeling trapped, like our thoughts racing. And it can also distort our thinking. Things like, I have too much to do, I can't cope, I need to do everything perfect. And I'm going to introduce a few key concepts here, which we're going to keep coming back to, because these are things that really get in the way of productivity. And the first is unrealistic expectations. This is us setting personal standards that can't possibly be achieved. It's a major part of perfectionism and affects a lot of people who struggle with anxiety, is that we set these really high targets, we fail to achieve them, and then we feel bad because we've done it. The second is living by fixed rules. This is when we've got too many musts or shoulds in our life, and we do things just because we think we must, but actually we don't need to do those things, and if we didn't do them, we'd be a lot happier. And then finally, catastrophizing, which is making things far worse than they actually are. So some examples of this, for example, unrealistic expectations. When I was doing my master's degree, I thought that anything less than a first was a fail. And anytime anyone asked me about it, I was like, I got 67 in the exam. I have completely ruined everything. Is it realistic? Well, maybe, but probably not if you're trying to do a master's degree and be a dad and have a job on top of it. Living by fixed rules. I must have a clean kitchen before I go to bed. I can't tell you the number of times I've been up at like 11 p.m. thinking I need to get to bed. Be like, I just clean this kitchen, I'll just clean this kitchen. As if somehow, if I don't clean the kitchen, the world will explode. Or catastrophizing, perhaps. If I don't check the post, I'll miss an important bill, and then the bill won't get paid, and then I'll get taken to court, and I'll go into debt, and I'll then not be able to pay any of my bills. I won't be able to pay my rent. I'll live on the street, and then I'll die. It's possible. I can't promise you that that won't happen, but I think if you leave most of your mail till tomorrow, you'll probably be fine there. So the big question I think here, when we're feeling we need to be more productive, is, do we actually need to be more productive? Like, what's going to happen if we're not as productive if we want? And I'd encourage you to give yourself permission to be less productive than you would like. Because chances are that many of us have set an incredibly high standard of productivity, and we think that if we don't match that, then our life is just going to be a failure. But when we digest that, when we think that through, it's clearly not, because we're living our lives now. People like us, I assume. And what would be the worst case scenario if we weren't as productive as we wanted to be? Because when we put this pressure on ourselves, that's anxiety. That feeling we get when we're not being productive enough is anxiety. And anxiety is generally not a positive force for doing things. It's quite good if the thing you need to do is run away from a tiger or fight the tiger. But in terms of getting letters opened and bills paid, it's not particularly useful. So this is the kind of thing that you would cover if you went to do a kind of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is used a lot with anxiety and depression now. And it says, well, instead of curing your anxiety and depression, what we're going to say is, what if we just said, we're going to live our lives anyway? And it's not giving up, but it's saying, well, this is something that's going to take a long time to get rid of. And maybe it's just I'm genetically wired this way and it's just part of me. But the fact that I'm in that situation doesn't mean that I can't have the life I want. And I think we can do the same thing with productivity, in that we're never going to be Gary Vaynerchuk or Barack Obama. They can just plow on 100%. And I would say I certainly can't. I don't know about you. But it's okay not to be that. And it's okay to say, well, how about we do 60% productivity, because that's a more realistic aim. Because when we aim for that, we're more likely to hit that 60 rather than the, say, 20 we were on the hypothetical pie chart. So, good questions to ask ourselves. Am I setting expectations that are unrealistic? What's the worst case scenario if you're really stressed, you're thinking, I just can't do this? Well, what would be the worst case scenario? What would be the worst case if I came out of my master's with only a merit versus a distinction? The reality is that that's not going to affect my life, probably in any way. And anytime you find yourself with a thought like that, you really dig into that worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario if you didn't pay a bill? Maybe there'll be a bit of a late fee. It's £60 bill, £10 extra. It's not the end of the world. And whose rules am I living by? Are the rules that I'm setting for myself, or are other people setting those rules for me? So let's look at some examples. If there's too much to do, then realistically, what can we do about that? Saying I'm just going to do it all is an unrealistic expectation if there's too much to do. So we could replace that thought by something like, I'll prioritize and do the things that I can. I'm now going to ask my colleague Chris to present a case study, and we'll go through it together and we'll try and work out what we can come up with.
Okay, do I look suitably stressed? I'm feeling hot. It feels a little bit like I'm stressed. Okay, first case study. I have 2 teenage children. I try to help them with all of their homework, but it's really hard to find the time when I also have to work, cook dinner, and run the household. I feel bad for not helping.
Cool. So, bearing in mind the kind of things we've been talking about, can anyone suggest to Chris what kind of questions he could ask himself and how he could reframe some of those thoughts?
Do they need help with all the homework, or can they do some of it themselves and help them with it? Do they need help?
Yep, really good answer. Order takeout. Yeah, and then more time for homework. Yeah, cool. Anyone else?
Can anyone else help within the household, like your partner or?
Yeah, so I think those are 3 really good answers there. They're teenagers. They're not 5-year-olds. They can probably look after themselves. So do they need help with all of their homework? If they do need more help, is there other stuff that we can get out of the way? Is it realistic for Chris to be the only person that can help with their homework, or are there other people in the house, are there older siblings, are there a partner in the house who can do some of that homework? So, yeah, really good answers there. Thank you, Chris.
Number 2?
No, I'll call you back up for that. Cool. So now let's look at avoidance. So this is where we've got stuff to do, but we're procrastinating about it. We just can't seem to sit down and do it. And maybe it just sits on our to-do list for ages. Now, typically we do this because it feels really unpleasant. If you've ever, I'm sure many of you have had to sit down and maybe make a phone call, fill out a form, write an essay, and it's just so hard to sit in the chair and just write some words, because everything about you, when I sit down, everything about me is just screaming, I want to go do something else. This kitchen dangerously needs cleaning. And it's understandable as humans, when something's hurting, when something feels unpleasant, that we want to go and do something else and try and avoid that pain. Now, 8 times out of 10, these problems are caused by perfectionism. And it's that we're making the task way harder than it needs to be. So it's really hard to, for example, sit down and write an essay if the only acceptable essay is one that gets 100%. If you sat down and tried to write an essay that got 10% and failed, you'd probably find that a lot easier. I definitely find that a lot easier, because then there wouldn't be any pressure. I could just sit down and write nonsense, and I'd probably pick up 10% of the marks. So this comes back again to holding ourselves to unrealistic standards, because if we're setting that bar too high, then there's an incredible emotional barrier to sitting down and do it. If we can lower that bar, then that pressure goes away. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we can notice and reframe those unrealistic expectations. So as we have done, as we could in the essay example, we could say, well, actually, as long as it's a pass, that'll be fine. It doesn't have to be that perfect. We can treat imperfection as an experiment. So maybe you feel uncomfortable in lowering those standards and saying, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. I definitely feel uncomfortable when I do that. But if you were to do, say, if you had depression or anxiety and you were doing cognitive behavioural therapy, one of the things your therapist would get you to do is go out and try something, and even though it felt unpleasant, stick with it to show yourself that even though it felt unpleasant, you could do it anyway. And we can do the same thing here. We can take something, a task, we can do it badly, and we can learn that we can actually live with that task not being done perfect, and it's not going to kill us, and it doesn't feel very pleasant, but we can still do it anyway and still get it done. We can break tasks down. This is a massive thing for me. For example, writing this talk, it's really hard to sit down and write a talk. But if you break the task down into, say, well, I'll write an outline and then I'll put the slides together and then I'll practice it, and breaking it down into as many steps as possible. Each one of those little steps isn't so big. A good example of this is if you've read Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. He talks about that massive stack of posts that you need to get through. And he says, well, just time box it. If you can't face opening all the letters, open one letter. Spend 1 minute reading, if that's the most you can do. And next day, just spend 1 minute again. Maybe the next day you think, oh, I can now spend 2 minutes, I can spend 4 minutes. Let's look at some examples of this. So booking a holiday, this is something I used to procrastinate over massively because you've got to arrange everyone's diaries. So how could we break booking a holiday down into smaller manageable tasks so that when we've only got 20 minutes and we're thinking 20 minutes isn't enough to book a holiday, it's going to take hours and so I'll put it off until tomorrow, we could break it down into smaller tasks. For example, finding a suitable date. Just going through the calendar and seeing when's available, maybe the work calendar if you need to book a holiday, that should be a fairly small task. Researching where you want to go, finding some accommodation, booking the accommodation, planning what you're going to do when you get there. Nice, small, easy tasks that don't think, that's going to take a whole day to plan, I can never get started with that. Similarly, maybe you want to improve my diet. I know a couple of years ago I wanted to introduce more vegetarian food, but it seemed like that was a massive thing to do and there was a load of planning involved. So again, I broke it down. First thing, I just went to Waterstones and bought a cookbook. And that was my job for the week. I've got a 5-week plan to improve my diet, and this week I just need to go buy a cookbook. And then I can tick that off. Then maybe go through the cookbook, check off the recipes you want to buy. Allocate a day to try a recipe, buy the ingredients, cook the meal. Now that's okay if it's just a task where we've just set really high expectations and maybe it's massive. But what if the task is something that's just incredibly unpleasant? Like maybe it's phoning the tax office, or maybe it's getting a dentist appointment, or something that is just going to be you really hate doing. Maybe it's having a chat with your boss at work or with someone that you're responsible for, and you just really don't want to have that chat because you know it's going to be horrible. What can we do to get over that? Well, a lot of this time, what we do is we say, I'll do it later, and then we spend all day stressing about it, and then it gets to the end of the day and we've got no energy left, and then we're like, well, I'll have to do this tomorrow then. Tomorrow comes and we go through the whole process again. In terms of these tasks, they need to be number one on your list. And this comes down to some research called ego depletion, and it's using the academic sense of ego, not what we would think of in everyday language of it. And that's that we only have so much willpower every day. And as we go through the day, that gets more and more depleted. So in the study, what they did was they got people to resist having some chocolates. And then they got them to do quite a demanding task, and they measured how long people could stick at this task. And what they found is people who'd already used up some willpower resisting the chocolates then were less able to stick with the task for a long time. So if you have got these really demanding tasks to do, I'd really encourage you to put them first thing on a morning at the start of your day, because the longer you leave it, the more your ego is going to get depleted and you're just going to run out of energy. And so now when I organise my day, I put the really horrible things first thing. And then after that, I feel great if I've got them out of the way, because then I know that my day is clear. And you don't have to do them all on one day. Maybe just say, I'll do one thing today that's really hard, and then the rest of the day I don't need to stress because I've done my one thing, and I give myself permission not to do other horrible things. And if you do find that you struggle, I would really encourage you to develop that nurturing inner parent voice. I know a lot of the time I'm quite harsh with myself, and when I haven't done something, I'm very self-critical. And for those of you who've also got kids, you know, you would never speak to a child like that. If they didn't get a hard task done, you would never say, yeah, you're an idiot. What are you doing messing about like this? But so often that's the voice inside of our head that we use to ourselves. And instead we can develop a more nurturing parent voice that just says, we tried our best, it's okay, let's go again tomorrow. So I'll now invite Chris up again and we can do an avoidance case study.
I'm starting to understand why I'm so stressed now, because on top of having to help my teenage children with all their homework, it seems I've started a business as well. So I've now to complete my tax return. Have to complete my tax return. I look at it every evening, but every time I try, I get a feeling of dread and end up doing something else. I'm safe for the record, I don't let the feeling of dread last very long. I think about it for roughly 30 seconds and then decide that the boxes in the attic really need to be put in the back bedroom or something like that. So there we go.
It is incredibly good for getting your house tidied. So, applying the principles we've just talked about, one of the things we could do, for example, is to break this down. So, what smaller tasks could Chris do to help him get started, to make it really short and actionable stuff?
Yeah. A nice environment to be in.
Yeah.
Like an environment that he doesn't get distracted by.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Find the login details.
Yes.
Okay. And you could look at last year's and realise out of the 32 forms that you only fill in about 7 boxes.
Yeah.
So you bring reality to it instead of thinking it's this big and think, actually you only have to fill in 7 boxes out of 32 pages.
Yep, I like it. Yep. Yeah. If that is an option, that is a convenient way to do it.
If you'd like to hand some business cards out, that's I'm sure people would say.
Yeah, so I like those answers. Some of that is regrading our expectations, right? Realising that actually last year's wasn't that bad, and so this year's won't be that bad. We can set up that nice environment, we can get our login details so that when we sit down, we know we can just get straight on with it and we don't have to worry about a lot of those things. When should Chris do it in terms of his day? First thing in the morning. And one final thing I think that Chris could do is check that perfectionism. I don't think his tax return has to be perfect. Now, I want to say that I'm not offering legal or accountancy advice here, but when you submit your tax return, it doesn't say this has to be 100% correct. It says this has to be correct to the best of my knowledge. And if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Not a lawyer. Thank you, Chris. Okay, let's look at focusing in on what's important. Because if you're anything like me, you're busy 100% of the time. There's not really much downtime for me. And so what that means is that what we're doing is the stuff we're prioritizing. It's not the stuff we've got to do, because there's always stuff we've got to do. It's the stuff that we choose to put at the top of that priority list. But a lot of the time, it can feel like we're not really focusing in on the things we want to do, and we're focusing in on maybe other people's priorities or things that we know are genuinely not that important, like cleaning the kitchen.
Hi everyone, so at this point the video cut out and I didn't want to leave you hanging without knowing the rest of the information, so I thought I would just talk over the remaining slides. It's not the same as seeing it live, but I think it'll still be useful for you. So we were talking about this idea of feeling that I just need to clear the decks and then I can focus on what's important. And you feel like if you can just cross off all those little tasks on your to-do list, then you'll be able to focus. And the reason you couldn't focus so far was that you had all these little tasks to do, but the decks never get cleared, and even when they do, we find ourselves too exhausted to do anything because we've used up all our energy trying to clear the decks, and then we don't have any time to do anything else. And I really found myself in this trap, and it took my therapist to point out, well, you could just swap your day around, and if you started by doing the important stuff at 6 a.m, then by the time it got to 9 p.m. and you were exhausted, it didn't really matter that the kitchen was a mess and that little jobs needed sorting out, because I was too tired to do them anyway, and I'd already done the important stuff. Let's look at some of the reasons we can't focus. So it could be living by fixed rules. For example, I always do the shopping on Wednesdays. It's very apt for me because it's now Saturday and I'm trying to do the shopping that I should have done 4 days ago. We haven't had any food in today, to the point where we're sick of eating out. Anyway, so yeah, living by fixed rules. Is there rules that you're following that you don't really need to be following because you've actually got something more important to do, something that you want to focus on? Catastrophizing. If I don't shower every day, I'll smell, I'll get fired, I'll have no money, and I'll end up homeless. This is something that every new parent goes through, and in the end you just lose the battle and give up showering every day. It's impossible to do when you've got a baby. Living by other people's priorities. For example, I need to read to my daughter every day to be seen as a good parent. I care more about what other people think of me than what I really want to be focused on. And fear of the unknown. I don't know if this will work, so I don't want to invest too much time in it. Often when we start a new project, we're kind of worried about that time just being wasted time because we don't know what's going to happen, and therefore when we try and focus on it, our mind's telling us, especially if we're anxiety sufferers, this isn't going to work, there's no point in doing this. So what can we do about this kind of thing? Well, if you have anxiety and depression and you go for cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll be encouraged to challenge these beliefs. For example, let's say you promised to do a report at work, but it's been so busy that you haven't done it by the end of the day, and you decide that you're going to stay late to finish the report. Well, let's look at the belief in there and how can we challenge that. So the belief is probably, if I don't do the report, my manager will be mad and never promote me and fire me. So what thought patterns can we identify here? I think there's a number. For example, there's catastrophizing. It's one little report. And the chances of me getting fired because I don't stay late and do that report, very small. That seems to be blowing it way out of proportion. Mind reading. I'm assuming that I know my manager will be mad. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Unrealistic expectations. Does everyone else stay late to finish reports, or am I holding myself to a standard that I can't possibly reach? Is it a big deal? Do other people do this or not do this? Is it reasonable for you to sacrifice your free time in order to do this? These are the kind of ways we would challenge this for in CBT, and we can apply this to any problem where we have this kind of thought. We can pick it apart and say, are these expectations realistic? Am I catastrophizing? Next up, values and goals. It's really important to understand what our values are, because sometimes we just have to pick between two really hard things, right? Like spending time with our family or doing more at work, or focusing on a hobby, or picking between two volunteering opportunities, something like that. And if we don't know what's important to us, how are we supposed to pick between the two? Whereas if we do know what our values are and what our goals are, then it becomes much easier to pick because we can justify it to ourselves. I'd also emphasize that goals are way better at driving productivity than motivation. And I mean a goal is a motivation, but motivation in terms of I'll do that when I feel excited and motivated about it. If you sign up for a marathon, when your alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and you've got to go out for a 3-hour training run, you're never going to be excited about that. Maybe some people are, but as a marathon runner, I can tell you I never was. But having a goal of completing a marathon is what got me out of bed at 6 a.m. So you need to determine what your values are, what your goals are, because when you come up against hard decisions of, for example, trying to be the world's best parent versus trying to do an evening class, some kind of qualification, you're going to need to be able to justify that decision to yourself, and to do that, you're going to need to know what your values are. Okay, final section, relaxation. And I'm going to talk about marathon running again, but the average marathon time for men is 4 hours 23 minutes, and for women it's 4 hours 48 minutes, which made me feel brilliant because I did it in under 4 hours. But what is far more important is that Eliud Kipchoge, the world record, he smashed the world record in Berlin in 2018, where he ran 2 hours 1 minute and 39 seconds, which was over a minute off faster than the Denis Kimato's previous world record. And he was asked, well, what's the secret? How do you run so fast? How do you run more than twice as fast as the average person? And he said the secret was rest. He said when he wasn't out there running, he was resting and letting the body to recover and recharging, so that when he was running, he was doing really high quality runs. Well, it's the same for us. If we don't spend time relaxing and being kinder to ourselves, then we're not going to be as productive as we want. Whereas, counterintuitively, if we actually spend more time relaxing, what we'll find is that the time we do spend being productive is really focused and we really get stuff done. Because if you feel unproductive and you stress about it, you're never going to get that relaxation, you're never going to get that recharge. Whereas if you give yourself permission to have periods of work and periods of relaxation, then both of those times are really focused. Now, relaxation is really hard. Especially if you're an anxiety sufferer, it's tough. It's not easy to do. And it also doesn't have to be something passive like meditating or sitting watching TV. I like to go for a run. I like to ride my bike. You can get the gym. You can do kickboxing. You can play video games. Whatever it is that gives your mind a break. It doesn't have to be giving your body a break necessarily. Let's look at some of the reasons that we don't relax then. I don't have time, but as we've already discussed, we're all busy, and so it comes down to what we prioritise. And I think that your happiness is important, I think that your mental health is important, and clearly we both agree your productivity is important because you're watching this talk. So I think it is worth prioritising. I have too much to do. Well, allowing yourself to relax will make you more productive. So if you want to get that stuff done, you need to relax. I'm not a priority. Essentially, when you're saying you have too much to do for other people, this is basically you're saying I'm not a priority. And again, as we've discussed, I disagree with that. I don't think you need to be embarrassed about looking after yourself. And this, again, a really common reason that I alluded to is I won't be able to relax. When I try to relax, it's just not relaxing. Well, relaxation is a skill and you need to practice it. And if you've been really hard on yourself and not allowed yourself to relax for a long time, then you're going to be rubbish at relaxing and you're not going to find it relaxing. Just like when you start mindfulness, it's actually really stressful because you can't keep the thoughts from coming into your mind. But that's okay. You keep practicing and you get better. And relaxation is the same. You just need to practice more. And eventually you'll get better at it. So, to conclude, being productive is often counterintuitive because we need to be kinder to ourselves. We need to relax a bit more. And those seem like things that won't make us more productive, but actually do. And not only will that make us happier, but it'll make us more productive, but it will also make us happier, is what I'm trying to say there. Some of the strategies we've learned, well, being too stressed to concentrate. Seems like you need to be kinder to yourself and accept that having anxiety is tough and it's going to be really difficult to be productive. And so when you are productive, that's a great victory to celebrate and be kind to yourself about that. If you're avoiding hard tasks, maybe you should challenge some unrealistic expectations. Tasks that seem too big to work on, you need to break them down, time box them so you don't get that feeling of dread when you start them. Having too many other things to do, we need to focus on what's important and be clear about our values and use CBT techniques to challenge our beliefs. And being too tired, you need to schedule in some relaxation. Now, none of this stuff is easy. You just have to practice spotting yourself making these mistakes and gradually correcting them. And if you only spot 1 out of 20 at first, that's fine. It takes time. Just keep going, because there's no big one secret here. It's about practicing these strategies over and over again. And it's like going to the gym. The first time you go in and you just lift a bar with no weights on, and it feels a bit rubbish, but you keep working on it and gradually you get stronger, and it doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get to lift much heavier weights. And in the same way, you can practice these productivity techniques. It won't necessarily make it easier, but it will make you more productive. You just need to give it time, keep working on the techniques, and they will deliver value in the end.